Okay, now we're going to take a look at custom materials, and we are going to be using the function editor, although I won't go too far in depth with it. Be able to show you how to use most of it and really start making your own surfaces. And the first thing I'm going to start out doing is actually adding just a standard terrain. So we're going to go up here and click the standard terrain button, and not a procedural terrain, because we want this kind of move quickly, and a procedural terrain might slow down our scene a little. And I'm just going to bring this into view, and we're mostly looking at the preview window here because we're going to be using that with the function editor open and just taking a look at our preview and see what we're getting. I'm going to go to edit material up here so we can bring up our material editor. And now if you're in the basic material editor, which is going to look like this, you just go up to this button up here and go to advanced material editor, and it'll bring you to your advanced settings. And what we need to do is right mouse click on this gray area, this gray sphere we have right here, and we can right mouse click and go to edit function. And what this is actually going to do is open the function editor for all of these different things. We could right mouse click on the bump and go to edit function, and we'll get the exact same function editor as if we were to do it with color, because all of this is linked to the same function. So we're going to edit function, and I'm going to drag this over to the side a little so we can see our preview, or as much of the preview as we can see here, just so we have enough to kind of view what's going on. And you'll notice that we have an entirely blank editor. And if you want to move around the editor, you can just right mouse click and position yourself. You can also use the zoom in and out if you needed to. But what we need to do is actually add nodes to create our color maps and our bump maps and anything else that's all linked inside this function. And we're going to start out by creating a color map for the object. So we have color selected down here. We're going to select add color node, and that's automatically going to link it. Now if we were clicked over here in one of the invisible squares and we added that node, it wouldn't be linked to anything. I'll just delete that right now by hitting the delete key. But since we had color selected, it added that and connected it to the color node. And now currently you cannot connect this to anything because it's just the color node, and there's no real definition in what's defining the surface of that color. If you notice here, we have a gradient down here, which is our color map. We can right mouse click and go to edit color map if we want to, and go ahead and create our own custom gradient for our color if we know what kind of color we want. Or we can close out of that, or we could double click and actually select some of the presets. And if I go ahead and just select this green, brown, white, the first one, and click OK, we're going to notice that our color is just this brown color. And if we take a look at our preview, you can see that our whole terrain is just that brown color, which is sort of the middle. But that's because we don't have anything defining the shape of this texture at all. So what we need to do is add a noise node. So we're going to go up here and click this button and add noise node. And actually what that did was it removed our color map. And that's because we had our color map selected when we added that node. And if we try to undo that, it's not going to do anything. It's actually going to keep us right where we were. Actually, we can go back a few steps and it'll bring us back to our color node. So if we deselect our color node and then add that, it won't remove our color map at all. Although, when you do make a color map and you set these properties, those become the default for that node. So if I click an invisible area and we click on this color node, it's going to create the exact same gradient that we had before. So if you ever remove something, you can just, if that was the last type you've created, you can go over and click another one and then link them together if you have to. Okay, so now we have our noise node, and right now, by default, our Perlin noise is selected at a value. And it's still not really having any effect on the scene, but that's because this is just linked to position, and it's really not linked to anything at all. We'll preview it, and we still just get this brown color, and that's because we need to link these two together. So we're going to grab our color node, just click on it and highlight it, and we're going to go up here and get this arrow and connect it to our noise node. And now, as you can see, our preview down here is very jumbled, and it's taken our gradient and moved it around to match with our noise. And you can see that the black areas of our noise node are the left part of the gradient, and the white parts are the right part of the gradient. So we have the green going to a white with a brown in between. And now if we preview our terrain in there, we can see that this noise node has taken effect and that it's dispersing our color uh, equal to what we have in our noise node. Now we can also edit this if we need to. We could change our wavelength, or we could do our overall scale. And if we bring that down and then do a preview, you'll see that it's a little more dispersed, and we have a lot more going on here, more flecks of the white everywhere. And we can change that if we need to. We can select this noise node, and you can go through any of the settings that we actually showed you before when we were dealing with the procedural terrains, because it's all set up exactly the same. Except now we have the ability to pretty much use all of these because these are based on surfaces and not exactly on terrain elevation. So I can select the cracks, and we'll go ahead and scale that up a bit. And now if we do a preview, we'll see the cracks throughout our entire terrain here. And actually, it's edited our color map preview. As you can see, it's changed now. But we'll scale that down and do another preview. And you can see now we have all these cracks throughout here. We can go through and select any number of these. We can do the leopard, and now we have the way our gradient's set up, or the white is the white area in here, and black is our green part of that gradient. And we also get a nice little preview here in our actual viewport, and you can come down here and actually say whether or not you would like to show that in the graph. So actually, if you want, you could just show these as functions and not necessarily as previews. Now we're going to go ahead and make something a little more complex here. So we're going to go back to the Perlin noise and go back to value. And now we have a little more going on. As you can see, though, it is quite large, so we want to change that. So we're going to bring our scale down, make it a little tinier. And now we have a little more variation in there. But I'm not real big on that color map, so we're going to change that. Just double click, and I'm going to use a different preset. I'm going to use this redstone preset and click OK. And now we have a nicer looking terrain. Of course, it's still a little large, but we're going to add other materials to that. What we could also do is, before we add another material and link them, we could actually add filters. So if we select our noise node, we can go over here to this little F and click on it, and that added a filter. Now this filter can be used as an actual filter like we've seen in other parts of Vue, and we can do new key points and really just create a filter. We can also curve that off if we wanted to, click OK, and now you can notice how it's changed our entire texture. And if we take a look at the preview, we have much more defined areas, and there's not so much smoothing in between. We could also use preset filters if we wanted to, just by double clicking on this button. And then we could do some of the presets that we have in there, or any you've saved yourself if you want to use those. Or we could change the filter node itself from filter to any of these number of things. We could base it on, we could do an increase in gamma if we wanted to, or a decrease. And there's just so many you can choose from. We could do a Gaussian, you can change the contrast if you wanted to, the threshold. And these filters really give you a great ability to just go and change all these different options. Like I said, we'd use the map mode, smooth map, and just go in and kind of mess with this and kind of see what you need. Of course, if we were to go through it right now, it would take forever, but just kind of browse around, see what things do, power, and most of them are really self-explanatory. They pretty much say exactly what they do, and if you have a little bit of a background to know what a lot of these are, if you used even Photoshop will help you if you've used that before, because they're very similar in some cases. So we could add a noise node, or a filter for our noise node, and now we have a little bit more going on, and it's edited our overall texture. Now let's say we like this color, but we want flecks of something else in there without having to edit our actual gradient map here. Well, what we can do is click this little Y down here, and that's going to give us our combiner node. And we'll set this over here, and I'm just kind of organizing right now. And we're going to click in one of these invisible areas, and I'm going to add another color node. And that's kind of moved us around a bit, so we're just going to have to recenter ourselves. But now we have this new color node right here, and we can go ahead and grab this little arrow and link them. And now we have a new color blending with it. And to really show you what's going on, I'm going to change it to an entirely different color. so we can really see the blend in there. And now if we take a look at our preview, we can see those colors are blending together, and we get a lot more going on in the scene. We could also link another noise node to this if we wanted. Click on one of the invisible boxes as an add a noise node, and then we can go ahead and link that. So now we have these two linked together. And we can also change those nodes if we wanted to. And we can do line patterns, fabric. It all depends on really what you're surfacing. But don't be confined by their names, because of course you can do lots of different things with, of course it says fabric right now, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to use it for fabric. Don't be confined by their names, because a lot of people will use those names and only use them for certain things, and you can really use it for just about anything. And it adds little bits here and there. And if we take a look at some of the more complex textures, you'll see that there's just a number of different things that you wouldn't really associate with what the final output is. So don't be confined by that at all. And we can adjust our scale. We're just going to do that. Take a look at our preview, and now we can see that kind of fabric on here, and giving us kind of a neat texture. But this is all just our color right now. And there's other things we could add too that we went over before when we were kind of dealing with the procedural terrain. But as you notice right now, we've only dealt with the color. So all we have is a color map on there right now. Well, there's not a lot of definition, doesn't look very realistic, so we want to edit our bump. So if we select our bump right now, adding a color node to a bump wouldn't exactly do anything because it's based on pretty much our noise nodes. So we're going to select a noise node with bump selected, and now we have a bump map linked to that noise node. And what we could also do is, if we want to blend these together, go ahead and click the Y again for the combiner node, and we can go in and actually add other noise nodes. I'll just go in and add, clicking in the invisible boxes so we don't have any specific links here, and then we can grab that combiner and go and combine these with these different nodes. And right now it's only letting me do 2 because we have it set to just Blender. And depending on what you're using, you'll get different options and be able to select more. So if we set to multiply now, we're able to select multiple nodes. And we also have still the ability to add even more than 3, because multiply is multiplying several together. The Blender is just for 2. So I'll go ahead and delete one of these, and we're just going to use 2 right now. But now we can change that if we wanted to, and go to the math patterns, and we'll use leopard. And we'll add that in there. And as you can see in our preview up here, we can see the bump in there now. And if we click on our terrain, we can see these large bump maps taking effect throughout the whole surface. And now our whole surface right now is actually quite large. And actually, since we do have the view remembering what we're doing for the last node here, we have the same node for the color right here and the bump. So those two are matching up along with their lines, and you do want to match up certain things with the bump and the fractal nodes and things like that, because they will look a lot more realistic and you'll get a lot more depth in the scene. I'm going to go ahead now and just click OK, and we're going to take a look at this in the actual layout here. We'll bring that in just a little, just to get a bigger preview. And you can see that we have a really neat looking texture here, but it's really big. So if we want, we could just edit the overall size without having to go into the function editor and actually changing that. We just change this down to, let's say, 0.1, and now we get a much smaller texture in there. And change it up to 0.5, and we can see a little bit more of what's going on. But we have a really interesting looking texture now. And now you can also use that function editor for defining other properties in that material. Of course, we have our bump, which is set, because now you can see that our bump map is actually showing up in here because they're both linked to the same function. But we can also do highlights and transparency, reflections, and add these extra additional nodes on there. And in order to do that, if we want to do transparency, the global transparency, we can click this little sort of lightning bolt right there, and we can drive it with a function. So we'll click on that, and that will automatically bring up our function editor, which has added an additional node down here. And then we could drive this, right now it's set to a constant number, and we can edit this in the function editor. We could also go ahead and change different things just within the function editor and change our highlight and our transparency and our reflection. So let's say we wanted a level of transparency that's not completely constant. We can add another noise node, and we're going to just use the Perlin noise, which is the default. I'll scale it down a bit and click OK. And click OK again. And we're going to have a little bit of a change in our transparency, which you can't really see right now. We're going to go back into that function editor. And I'm actually going to remove this global transparency right now, and I'm going to disconnect it. Or we could go to it. This arrow on the right is going to be go to function, and clicking back again on that little lightning bolt is going to turn it off. And I'm going to go back into our function editor through here. And we see that we still have this selected for our transparency. That's still selected the bump. I'm going to edit that scale just a little bit more, bringing it down, because it might be a little too large. And with these, we also have the ability, especially with the Perlin noise, to add rigid. And when we add rigid, it's going to make a dramatic change in that texture. I'm actually going to use the rigid right now. And we'll get a preview. We can see a little bit of a change, but not a major change. And we'll go back into that function editor and maybe try it a little bit bigger this time. And we'll just drag that up. Maybe not that large. Click OK. We'll get a preview. And it's kind of defining that area there. We could also edit our highlights and things like that. So we could go back to this color map, edit function. We're just going to bring up our function editor again. And we could also do reflections if we wanted to, or the highlights. So we could have specific parts being lit up and shinier than others. So if we add a noise node for the highlights, we can also have that linked. And this way, we'll only have certain parts receiving large amounts of highlight, and we can really vary that throughout, because now you can see we have bigger lit up parts of the actual terrain. And that's all driven by the function editor. So the function editor is very powerful. There's a lot you can do with it. And you want to go through and just kind of take a look at some of your options and see how to blend things together. Another real good learning experience is to reverse engineer other textures. So I'm going to actually get rid of this texture we have right here. I'm going to double click on this terrain right here, or on the material for it. And then we can double click on that preview and actually load in something that was already pre-made. And we can go to landscapes or liquids or rocks and just pick any of these. And actually the complex rock one is actually very complex. We're going to go in and select that complex rock. And now we can see that we have a mixed material this time, where we have the two blending together and it's set to mixed material. And actually these are mixed materials combined with other mixed materials. So we can right mouse click and go to edit material, which is going to bring up another mixed material. So this main material right here is being mixed between these two to create that one. And if we edit this material, we'll see that this material is being mixed between these two to create that one. So it just kind of goes on with the specific one. But now we can actually get to the actual root of this material is a original material. And we can go ahead and edit the function for that and take a look at what they did to create it. As you can see, we have the bump with the combiner, and we have a filter going to our fractal node, and we have another fractal node down here, and another one. And this one's mostly comprised of fractal nodes and not noise nodes. So if you wanted, you could actually turn that into a noise node, or we could use the fractal node, which is below that. And you can get different effects by using fractal nodes. We have basic repeater, simple fractal, which you can go ahead and change these certain parameters if we wanted to. But these are all being linked to the bump. And then we also have up here a turbulence node in Vue4 style turbulence. And that is linked to this specific part of the bump, which we can go ahead and add that in by selecting this first one right here, which is turbulence. And it's kind of it's very similar to a filter in the respect that we can change that, because right now this is set to filter, but we could also change this to many other things. So it's not necessarily just this type of filter. There's a lot you can do with it. And as you notice, we have the color right here where we have a combiner node, and which is linking this other color node to another fractal node, and then we have another color node and a noise node this time. And this is also being put together with a turbulence node on top of this and a combiner node right here. So you can really go through and dissect these and take a look at how a lot of these different materials are made. And actually this one was made up of several, and actually if we go in to this one now, we can take a look at how this material was made. And just go to edit function, wait for the function error to come up, and this one's actually quite simple. We just have a noise node selected to the color, and there's no color whatsoever. And then our bump, we have a combiner combining a fractal node and another fractal node, and a filter running in between the combiner and this fractal node. So there's a lot you can do with it. And I'm going to go ahead and close these out. And what we also have is this just distribution being controlled. So we can go to edit function on that as well. And that will actually bring up a separate function editor, which is pretty much telling you how to blend these two together, or where certain parts should be and where they shouldn't. And we have another fractal node and three fractal nodes, and those are all on a combiner node. And I can go in and show you that a little more in depth by just doing a new surface. So I'm going to go File, New, and I'm just going to do a new scene. Just kind of clear everything out of there, and return everything back to the default. And I'm going to add another standard terrain, and go into the material editor. And now we want this to be a mixed material. And now we have two separate materials, and I'm going to make these two entirely different colors. And I want to select solid colors, and I'm going to do a bright red, click OK, and this one is going to be blue. And now we have these two blending together, but right now it's just blending the two colors together, and then it's all solidly being blended together. Well, if we right mouse click and go to edit function for this distribution, we can go in and do whether we want a noise node or a fractal node. We'll do a fractal node this time, and we just have it set to simple fractal, and we can make the largest feature bigger or smaller. We could also change the gain if we wanted to, so we get a much brighter change in between there, and click OK. And now, as we can see, it's not very large, so we're going to scale this down to, let's say 0.4, so we can see this a little bit better. And now we can see these surfaces are being blended separately because of this distribution of materials 1 and 2 fractal node. And we can also run this with a filter. So we can click Edit Filter, and if we bring this down a little, and click OK, you can see that extra little option. And we can bring it up even higher, and that's just setting how much blend you want in between there. And we could also go ahead and add new key points if we wanted to have one material a little more definite than the other one, or a little more defined overall. And click OK, and you can see on our terrain we have those two textures blending separately, driven by a function in the function editor, which you can go in and use your combiner nodes if you wanted to, and just blend that all together. So it's really neat what you can do with it. And then you can also add materials on top of materials, like we had with the other one. So let's say if we wanted this red to also be a mixed material, we could just select mixed material, and now we have two more materials. If we want to get back to that red, we could just right mouse click, go to edit material, we can edit the red. Or we can go into this new material now, which these two are also blending together. So if we edit that material, we're going to do another color. We're going to do green this time, and click OK. Now it's blending the red and the green together to make up that first material. But it's a bland color, so we might want to drive a function with that as well. So we're going to right mouse click on the distribution of materials 1 and 2, and go to Edit Function. And this time we can use a noise node if we wanted to, and click OK. And now we have these two materials being blended together. And we could also scale that down if we wanted to. Let's do 0.1 this time, and that way we'll get a much smaller looking material. And click OK. And now, as you can see, we have the first material in here, which is the combination of the red and the green, and then just our blue that we're blending it in together with. And click OK, and we can see this preview. And we have interesting looking texture there. So there's a lot you can do with this function editor and distribution of all these things. And we could also run that second one too with a filter if we wanted to. We could edit that filter and drag that down so it's more defined by red, or more defined, let the green in there a little bit more. And you could also add the key points like we did and really just blend it together however you wanted. And like I said, you can do combiner nodes. So if we go back into edit function for the distribution, we can bring this up, and we're going to click that little Y to give us a combiner node, and we're going to move that out of the way. And now we want to add a fractal this time, so we're going to click on a blank space, add a fractal this time, and now we can mix those two together. Now we have this simple fractal, and then we could do a 3 noise fractal if we wanted to. And go ahead and edit that as we want, adjust the gain. And this actually has a lot of options in it. And because of the screen resolution, I actually can't get all the way down. So we're going to change that back to basic repeater, because actually what that's doing is giving you 3 different sets of that noise. But because of the screen resolution right now, because the recording is 1024 by 768, so you couldn't really see that specific option. So I would suggest to you to have a higher resolution than 1024 by 768. I usually work in 1152 by 864 or 1024 by 1280. So it really depends on your preferences, but you might want to have it at least a little bit larger than the 1024 by 768 in your display properties, because Vue does like to use larger resolutions, and for 3D animation you're going to be using larger resolutions if your video card can support that. When I click OK now, we can see that more defined in those areas now. And we have, like I said, just pretty much a really interesting looking texture, and you can do that to make more realistic textures and just blend more one on top of another and distribute them all different ways across the terrain. You could also link them to slope and things like that. So you just kind of want to poke around, reverse engineer some those materials and really take a look now that you know what a lot of those different functions do, and you can see how some of the materials that came with Vue, how they work.